Good morning, everybody. Good to see so many here, despite the cyclone striking and hitting Darwin over the last couple of days. I hope those of you who are living in Darwin, either here in the room or online, that you're all safe and that the damage hasn't been too much and that it will be easily repaired. And I really appreciate you, despite everything happening, being here today in the lecture, in the room, but also online. So good to see you and good to know that you're safe. Cool. Now, before we start today, I have Saira here from Study Abroad. CDU is offering a lot of amazing opportunities for students, undergraduate and postgraduate, to study abroad. I've just been on a staff exchange, on an academic exchange to the University of Bergen in Norway, which was great, lots of snow and skiing. But apart from that, it was just absolutely amazing to get an insight into the Norwegian education system and to see, what they are doing there, what they are teaching, how they are teaching, and to experience another culture is always, one of the best education you can get. So I really encourage you to listen what Saira has to say, and then, to check out the opportunities we are offering here and to take an opportunity up. So I hand over to you.
Awesome, thank you. Hi guys, so my name's Sierra, like she said, and I'm with a program called Volunteer Eco Students Abroad. So the reason I'm here is because we're looking to take about 10 of you guys to travel with us next summer to the Amazon, Fiji, Southeast Asia, and South Africa. So it is a 2-week program. The first week is all volunteering. So you could be teaching English in village schools, building houses and bathrooms, installing water catchments, working with some cheetahs and crocs, or even working in a remote elephant sanctuary. It's really just up to you guys which country you want to volunteer in. And then the second week, just a sort of a really big thanks for all the hard work you do in the first week. There is no work involved at all. It's all about you guys getting to see your host country, enjoying the culture. So in the Amazon, we do a week-long jungle trek. You get to go hiking, visit shamans, go whitewater rafting. In Fiji, we take you island hopping. So you get to go snorkeling with some reef sharks, some turtles, go scuba diving, cave exploring, even go skydiving if you want to. Then in Asia, we take you tubing to some blue lagoons. You can visit monks and their temples, even go hot air ballooning. And then in Africa, obviously a trip to Africa wouldn't be complete without going on a couple safaris. So you're going to see lions, elephants, and the comparison I always make is basically the whole cast of The Lion King, because you guys all know that. So just put a really good image in your head. So if any of that sounds good to you, we're going to be having our annual information meetings tomorrow. So that's on Wednesday. They're at 10:10. 11:10. They keep going on. The last one starts at 3:10. The meetings are in room 1.1.52. That's level 1 and blue 1, the blue precinct, however you say that. So yeah, that's where the meetings are. And if you can't make any of the meetings, all the information is online at www.vesabroad.com, and you guys can go check it out there and apply there if you want to. But honestly, it looks really amazing to have international volunteer work on your resume, and it is really, really fun. So hopefully see some of you guys tomorrow, and thank you very much for letting me speak.
Thank
you.
Fabulous. Can I go too? Also for the external students, Saira is sending me some information, which I'm going to put them on an announcement, so that you have the details about where it is tomorrow and the website as well. Yeah. Cool. Thanks, guys. Cool. Okay. Yeah. So much to experience in the world, right? So many exciting things. So I hope you check it out and follow it up, because it's an awesome experience to have. And also that for, I don't know for those guys, but for other programs, there's scholarships available too. So you can actually get some money to have fun. I could have said. Cool. So week 4, you're basically, 4 weeks into your 12 weeks course. Isn't that amazing? So that's 1/3 through the way, which is amazing. So congratulations. Now, my apology that we had to cancel yesterday the academic writing workshop to start preparing you for writing the assignment. yeah, it just wasn't feasible for Amanda to do it yesterday. So we're going most likely to do it next Monday. So just already, reserve the date and the time in your diary, and I will let you know and confirm whether that's the case. Depends on whether Amanda can make it as well. Haven't spoken with her yet because we just reopened today. So I'll let you know about that. Really highly encourage you to hop on board of this academic writing workshop, because it really prepares you specifically for that assignment. It goes through the assignment task, what you need to consider, and how to structure your assignment as well. And you can ask, if you are in the room, you can also ask questions as well and can get them answered straight away. Also, what I did, I uploaded for you the assessment rubric under the assessment item for the essay. Strongly encourage you to check out the assessment rubric, because it is actually really good, and it gives you a structure for the essay. Because all the criteria go in the structure of the essay and how we would like you to approach the topic. And you can see according to the grades what we are expecting for each of the grades. Also, to make it a little bit easier for you guys, because I know especially in the first year it's always like a bit challenging to get the hang of how we want to have the essay formatted. So I'm giving you a big help and hint there. I actually uploaded the template for the title page for you. So if you use the template, everything formatting-wise is already in there. Yeah, so just use the template and you will be fine in terms of formatting. Good. Any questions? Who had already started with the assignment? Just to explain for the external students, the last in the room, no hands went up. So nobody has started yet, and that's absolutely actually okay. And here's why. Because for the last 3 weeks, what we have been doing with you, we have been building the foundation. Now, only this week we are actually going into the topics, and the next 3 weeks topics will be part of your assignment. So I'm actually really delighted that you haven't started yet, because without the knowledge, obviously, it's a bit challenging to start. So just have a really good, I encourage you now to start though. So have a look at the assessment task so that you know what it is all about. And then, really listen during the lectures and when you're reading the material and looking through the LearnLine material, to have this task in mind so that you can select accordingly based basically on the assessment task. Yeah, makes it much easier. What else? And as I said, then also have a look for the referencing and literature search workshop. So the recordings are uploaded under frequently asked questions, but also under the assessment item. This one really, because you have to search for literature, you can't just obviously get, write the essay out of thin air after talking about the importance of research and the scientific literature. You have to search for scientific literature. The minimum we are expecting from you is 5 journal articles, which you are going to use to construct your argument in the assignment. So obviously you have to find those articles somehow, and the literature search workshop is giving you the tools of how to do that. If you experience any challenges there, get in touch with our librarian, Alex. You find her information under library in the resource folder. And Alex, her task is to empower you in finding the right literature and also to reference correctly. So anything to literature search and referencing, Alex is the person for you. Yeah? Good. Any questions to the essay? Difficult if you haven't actually started. So I think next week, you will start probably coming in with the questions as well. Then also keep in mind the mid-semester quiz as well, to start already working and studying towards that as well, so that it's not all coming together in one go. Yeah. So really one of the best exercises you have there is to keep up with the weekly tasks I'm giving you each morning, each Monday morning. And to, it's not sufficient just to read the chapter or just to turn up to the lecture and listen. It's not going to work. You really have to engage with the material in the lectures and in the book as well, and make notes from the chapters, from the lectures, so that you're really engaging on a deeper level with the material. And use the questions which are given to you and which you can answer in the actual online book, because they are the best preparation you can get, because the questions will be very similar format-wise in the test as well. So that's a really good strategy to use. And we know from research that the more students participate in practice tests, which that basically is, then the better will the actual test performance be. Also, what we're going to give you so that you can get a little bit of an insight into how the actual online test is going to work. We're going to give you probably a week before, maybe 2 weeks before, a practice test, which will be online, using our Blackboard system, which will have similar questions, or not similar questions. The question format will be similar, and you will see. So we are going to time it in a way that will be just 20 minutes, but you will get the proportion of the questions which you would get in the larger 1-hour test. Yeah, so that you can get a sense of, how does the whole online test work. Good. Any questions to the test? No, all good to go? Oh, one question there. Yep.
Is the actual online one, is it 20 minutes?
No, so the actual one is 1 hour, and you get 80 questions in 1 hour, and you have 2 attempts. You don't have to use both attempts. But we're giving you 2 attempts, just basically, we know that it can be a bit challenging if you do a test for the first time and you only have 1 go, and oh my God, what happens if, the internet cuts out and all of those things. Just takes the pressure off a little bit. So you don't have to do both tests, but you have to do the first one, and then after the first one, the second one is straight away. If you want to do it, go for it, do it. If you don't want to do it, that's fine too. So that's really up to you. That's our offering to you, basically. Good question, thanks.
Does the online test use the Shopback platform?
No, it's going to use our Blackboard platform for the very simple reason that this is linked to all other systems at CDU as well, and also not to disadvantage, obviously, those students who have not the textbook. They wouldn't be able to see that. So it's it's using our one, and you will the window where you can access the test will appear in the assessment item for test on top, 5 minutes before the test starts. Yeah, but as I said, you will in the practice tests you will go through that process basically, so that you get a bit of a familiarity with it. Cool. Other questions? We're good. Otherwise, I'm sure a question will come. So keep an eye on frequently asked questions. Whenever there's questions which I'm getting repeatedly, I'm going to post the answers there. So keep an eye on there. Also, if there is something which is not on the frequently asked questions, click me an email and then I get back to you. Yeah? Good. Awesome. Then let's start with today. Today is a really cool topic. So that's the first topic, basically, psychological topics. So far we have looked what is psychology. We have looked at the 8 psychological perspectives. And last week we looked at where do actually psychologists get the knowledge from, what is scientific research, and what different types of research are there. So now that gives you a really good foundation to start, because also, you very often, as you go through now through the topics, you will very often see like, oh, that's the behaviorist perspective here, or that's actually the humanistic, or that's the cognitive perspective feeding into what we know about a particular topic. But also, when you're reading through the book, you will, read something like an experiment was conducted to do blah, 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 right? And then hopefully you will say, oh, experiments, that's the only ones which do what kind of relationships? Cause and effect, exactly. So you know that, right? Or you will read about, qualitative research that interviews were conducted, and then you know, okay, that is quantitative or qualitative? Qualitative, exactly. So you now have that knowledge. Otherwise, if you read it, it wouldn't make much sense. Now it does make sense. So hopefully you enjoy applying your knowledge as you're reading along. Great. Good. So language and thought is a very interesting combination, and very often we talk about language and thought as two separate things, right? We not very often actually connect them. However, real change comes when people are enabled to use their thinking and their energy in a new way, using a different system of thought, different language, and having a fresh vision of the future. So, new thought and different language. Suggesting the way we are using language is actually really vital. By changing the way we talk, we can actually change our thinking. And by changing our thinking, you learned in the second week, I think, you can also change your experiences. Yeah? New experiences make different things possible. So there's a really, really strong connection, and those connections, and we're going to explore as we're going through the discussion today, we're going to explore what those linkages between language and thought are. So we are commonly using language and we are commonly using thinking, but really, what is it? It's always quite interesting and astonishing when you stop and you think, well, what is it actually? And are they connected? And if yes, how are they connected? So in this week, you will discover answers to what is language, what is thinking, what's the power of language, how does language impact on our lives, how does language develop? I mean, language is one of those capabilities we have, and we just, we talk, no big deal. But actually, if you think about it, it's astonishing, how we develop language and, what it makes it possible for us. So we will have a look at the factors and processes that facilitate language development. And as always, we will look, is it more nature or is it more nurture? Is it an innate ability we have, or is it something which our environment teaches us? And then again, what's the influence of language on thinking? And how do people solve problems and make decisions? Another area, we just basically, yes, there's problems and we're engaging in problem solving, each day. Same with decisions, we make decisions each day, but we really actually stop and think, how do we actually make our decisions? Or how do we solve problems? What's actually involved? And might there be a different way of doing it, which might be even better? Yeah, so that's what we're going to look at this week. Now you could still ask, what's in it for me? And as always, I will tell you that actually communication, critical thinking, problem solving, decision making are critical skills employers want in employees. Big things, because very often employers can now, they train you in the technical knowledge, but thinking, communication, problem solving, and decision making are skills which are, not readily teachable. Well, they are teachable, but it takes time to develop them as well. So your university study is developing all of those skills. And it gives you, and if all of those, the more effective you are in all of those four areas, the more effective you can be in your life. So we are going to have a look at language and how language develops, language and the brain, how what areas of our brain are actually involved in language. What's that thing? A mental lexicon. So I invite you to consider that we actually have a mental lexicon in our minds. Then language and thinking, mental representations, and what's that to do with language and thinking? And then how can we change our mental representation to engage better in more effective problem solving, decision making and reasoning as well? Did somebody note something strange in how I presented those stepping stones? Yeah. Thank you. Yes, that's exactly right. And we will see later on in the lecture today different way of thinking, right, and different language as well, which is culturally as well. And for me, if I tell you my thinking, well, typically we have it from, from the top down. From my perspective, if I say stepping stones, I'm going from one step to the other. So it makes actually sense to get from the bottom, but typically it's not done. And typically, students think, oh, hold on. So different way of thinking, different language. Good, language. Let's start. I invite you to consider that much of our thinking is done with words. And to actually understand the way we are thinking, we need to understand language first. And language plays a tremendously critical role in how we're thinking. So different languages make available different ways of thinking. And that might be, especially for international students and students who have been migrating to other locations or who live in other locations even within Australia. You will have already started, when you learn a different language, how different languages make different thinking available. And we're going to get a bit deeper into that today. So what is language? Any takers? Remember, there's no right or wrong. And it makes you look good, as always.
So is language an expression of thought using words?
Yeah, absolutely. It's an expression of thoughts using words. And yeah, absolutely. And there's more. But that was a quite start. Communication. Yeah, so we use language for communication. Right? Yes, absolutely. Body language. Thanks for adding body language, because we often just think about, verbal language. But consider body language is a massive element of how we are communicating and also of how others understand us. And, it's, and also how, other people, or especially context countries, indigenous people, China, who have a massive sensitivity to body language, much more sensitive to how we are, to what's happening actually as a person, and their listening is much more refined. Which brings me to another thing which we often underestimated, and it doesn't even occur in your textbook, and hence it's not in the lecture, but I invite you to consider that actually when you're looking at communication and language, really what's really important is listening. And not only listening to what's said, but listening to what's behind the words. What does the body language say? What's the emotion behind words? What's the commitment about something which is said? Yeah? That is exactly right. So it's not only the words, it is body language, it's the tone. What else did you say? No, you said some more. Yeah. There were 4 things. Not good listening. That wasn't good listening on my part. Yeah, but it's gestures. For some people, it's the energetic aspects as well. If you go with the spiritual elements, right? What's the energy like of the person? we can also, when we're comparing the words and, the body language, how authentic is what is being said. Yeah? Not necessarily, because some people are more, depends on the person, right? Because the alignment between words and being is different for different people. For some people it's very much out, and for some people it's very closely aligned. So it's not necessarily, but it's there is a whole, it's a more extensive world available beyond words. Absolutely. This side is winning out today, so far. Just mentioning. Okay. Any other things about language? Pardon? Symbols. Can you tell me a bit more about symbols?
If like you have to find what the words means, and to create the words you use symbols. So if to speak or to understand another person, you create the word, and the words sometimes are symbols. If I don't know exactly the name. You have to create the word sometimes, because the main word, for example, can mean something for me, but something different for another person.
Ah, so words are not just words.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah? Oh.
It's a construction.
It's a construction. Yeah. Cool. Awesome. Absolutely. So words are not just words. There's a whole world behind the words. Yeah? And that's symbolic. And we're going a little bit more into that, what that means. So it's not only words, but it's the meaning. What meaning do we assign to those words? And different meanings then also for different people, as we discovered in the second week, yeah? So there is a whole lot of different interpretations behind each word, which also then we often explains, two different people saying the same word and not understanding what they actually mean, because the word means something else for each of them. Yeah? So there's more to words. And I guess that's what you've been referring as well to. So it's not only... No, it is very often cultural differences as well, absolutely. But it's also within cultures, Different people have, as we discovered in the second lecture, different people interpret differently. Yeah? So good. So it's a system of symbols, of sounds, and rules for how we also combine the sounds and the meanings as well. And can be spoken, it can be written, and gesture. So that's the whole body language. Actually, also what we miss there is the sign language. Yeah. So sign language is very well. I think it's very amazing when you see those guys signing, and you think, gosh, So there is a whole different world there. So it's spoken, written, and gesture. And it is, as somebody else said, it's the primary mode of communication among humans. Now that's increasingly contested as well, because, actually, if you see the whole, as long as you take in the spoken, but also the gesture of it as well, then yes, absolutely, it's the primary mode of communication among humans. And language has the greatest powers. If you think about it, it allows us, to share what's in our minds, right? If we wouldn't have language, how would we, transfer and share what's in our minds to other people? Would be challenging, wouldn't it? In some cases, it might be better, yes. But also then, to improve the ideas, right? In the best case scenario, to add to each other. If we really constructively start sharing our ideas, then we improve the knowledge and we improve solutions, for example, if you talk about problem solving. So it's really, you could say it's like a communication between the minds, but in our minds. It's an outer expression. So it's really conveying what's in our minds to others and to transfer thoughts and feelings. Now with the feelings, that's where, you know, the body language comes in big time. Pardon? Could be, yes, absolutely. But I mean, like we would be very irritated if somebody says to us, "Oh, you know, I'm fine," and the body language is like, "Oh, no, really not," and we pick it up, right? So yes. However, I also consider, I invite you to consider that, you know, the more fine-tuned we have language available for expressing emotions, the more we could actually express ourselves also using words in terms of emotions. Yeah? Like, I mean, like we can have, you know, just anger, for example. You know, I can say I'm angry or I'm upset. But if you think about, there's so many different, you know, different ways of being upset or being angry. Now, if we can express them, what would happen with the other person if we can, you know, express our emotions more nuanced? Pardon? Deeper connection. That the other, you know, the other person would know much better. Oh, you know, this is how she's feeling. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Typically, because also what it requires is a profound knowledge of yourself, right? The more you can distinguish within yourself, you know, how you are feeling, and if you then have the words to express it, the better, the more nuanced your communication will be. Also, there will be less space for misinterpretations. Yeah, the more nuanced I can express something, it's easier for the other person to understand, and there's less, you know, the less they have to fill in on their side to do guesswork of what's actually really going on. Yeah. So the more nuanced, the more clear and effective your communication. So the access then to that is, you know, being really aware of yourself. Now it's easier though, you know, to be aware of yourself and what's going on if you have a whole array of nuanced words for it. Yeah? Because then you can go, okay, so am I feeling this like today or like this today? Yeah? Can you see, starting seeing the interactions there? And also, and that's a really huge power of language, enables to connect previously unrelated information to create new ideas that aren't in front of us. The more linkages we can make, the more integrating we can do, the more coherent our stories will become, right? Now, the more coherent our stories are, the more healthy we are. You know, have you ever, you know, trying to write a letter and there were ideas everywhere, but it was really challenging to bring it into coherent flow? Yeah. And our mind, you know, is basically designed to look for those connections and to make those connections so that it becomes coherent. Yeah, and you're not giving up until, you know, it flows for you. Now then something else can emerge. Then it really, the sum becomes more than the parts. So, you know, two students, for example, can write, you know, can use the same kind of ideas for their assignments. And one can connect them and have them flow in a coherent way, and the other one has them disjointed. Different story. Yeah. So that's, you know, one of the tasks in your assignment, to create this coherence, to link ideas which weren't there before. And that's, as we said, deep associations with words we are using. So I invite you to consider that with everything, basically with every word, there is a whole world between or behind each of those words. Can I have a volunteer? Great, awesome. Do you want to sit or do you want to come? Yeah? Great. And there's nothing right or wrong, right? But first of all, actually, thank you. So your task now is just to freely, basically, tell me everything you know about water. If I say to you water, what comes to mind?
Okay. I think of the sea, I think of drinking, I think of life, I think of plants, I think of the cyclone, I think of swimming. Does it have to join up or
Well,
just anything?
Whatever
Okay.
comes to mind. If I said water.
The main thing is life,
Life.
because without it we can survive. I think of our body, which is a whole lot of water. Rain, crying, blue, thunderstorms, trees. Don't know why, but I think of trees. Sustenance, swimming, fun, drowning.
Yeah, that's great.
I could keep going.
You could keep going, yeah?
Okay.
No, that's great. Thank you very much. That was awesome. I just said water. Right? Just to show you how much the world is. And if I would have asked somebody else, if the same would have started. And she said, well, I could keep going, right? So everything, and also the more then she went off in different branches, the more specific it became, right? So consider that behind each word there is a whole word, or associations, what they say, associations. And also, obviously, you can use communication to influence others, right? The more effective you can express yourself, the more you can also influence others, and the more you can create clear communication between you and others. Now, also where the connectedness comes from is that language actually uses several areas of our brains, and it's connecting the emotional, the cognitive, and the perceptual areas, right? So what we perceive is fed into the language, the cognitive elements, but also our emotions as well. This is why language is so powerful, because really it actually expresses all of those things. But we can hear it, and the degree to which we can express it, different matter, but actually it's available. So we build representations and connections of abstract concepts between the concrete and the real world examples. So water, I didn't even show you water, right? So it was actually, I just said the word water. Yeah, abstract. And then, what's her name? Deborah. And then Deborah, told me all about those real world concrete examples of water. Yeah, so it's a mental representation in her mind of all of those things. And all of the things she told me, Deborah told me, that's what she accumulated over the lifetime. And all of those things she stored in her mind, in her mental lexicon, as connected to water in one way or another. So basically in our minds we have accumulated over our lifetime a huge mental lexicon with symbolic representations of concrete things, but at an abstract level. And we're connecting them. Now, why that happening is that people constantly look for deeper meaning in everything. We always say, okay, what does it mean? So then I asked Deborah for water. She basically told me everything what water means for her. So we add meaning to our communication through the use and interpretations of signs. That's where the symbolic science is, the symbolic representation. So a symbol basically is a character used as a conventional representation of an object, representing something abstract, function, or a process. Basically anything can become a symbol. If you look at it, you know, I mean, if I say this lectern, I'm actually giving it the name lectern. It's not really that, right? I gave it the name, but actually it's something else. It's, you know, it's a bit of wood, or maybe not, put together in different shapes. So it's interpreted to mean something other than its literal definition. So the textbook gives you the owl. So, you know, again with the water, like behind the owl is a whole, you know, different. It's a symbol for, or if I say owl, again, you know, a whole word emerges, or a rose. Now that's pretty universal. Anybody who knows what that symbol is? No? Different culture, then it becomes a bit more challenging for us to know what it is. That's the symbol for harmony. But, you know, now that I tell you, and maybe next time you see it, you will say, oh, symbol for harmony. Is the word of harmony behind that lines of black on white paper. Chair. This is actually, you know, a symbol we gave, chair. You know, for somebody who's freezing, what would a chair be? Fire, exactly. Yes. Now, if you want, you know, if you're looking for something to sit, it would be sitting. Yeah. So basically, it's just basically something again made up of wood and maybe a bit of metal, put together in a certain way. But it has, you know, can be used for many different functions. So some symbols are ingrained as a culture or across cultures, and then they have a universal meaning, like, you know, the rose probably is, well, I don't know, probably is quite universal. So it's really the linking of the abstract and concrete concepts together, and that helps us interacting with the world. As one of the students said, if you wouldn't have those connections, then you wouldn't be able to communicate with each other, right? And I invite you to consider that we can't actually, without language, we can't experience, feel, and think. Really difficult, because we wouldn't be able to name it. Pretty amazing, isn't it? What's actually behind language when you start digging a little bit deeper. So how does language develop? It's a tremendously rapid development in our early childhood. Anybody who has children, you know, if you witness how, you know, fast children are learning a language, how much they're, you know, how fast they're absorbing it once they keep going or get going, it's absolutely astonishing. We are actually language experts by the age of 3. Now, given, you know, that you know, a little child has, you know, the cognitive development is you know, very much developing during this time, becoming a language master or expertise in language, that's astonishing. Now that's partially due to the development of specific brain regions, because as we said, you know, the brain and language are connected, and different regions of the brain are involved in getting connected through language. Hmm? Yeah. Oh, sorry. Oh, symbol. that's my computer using a different symbol. Thanks for picking that up. I used a friend's computer yesterday to finalize. That's actually this one. It's about 3 years approximately, yes. But so that was a great example of symbol, right? So I used a symbol which you can't know because I just invented it. So thanks for asking. Now, although, you know, and hopefully, you know, when you're reading the PowerPoint again, you will say, oh, that's the symbol that I use this for about. We just created a new symbol for about, just between us. That's very good. So how come, I mean, have you ever asked yourself, you know, how come that so much of our early development is devoted to language? Only way we're going to survive. Yeah. Why?
I think because after the crying stage, the babies get fed, then they need to be able to articulate what they actually want. Otherwise, they just live a life of total frustration. That's it.
Yeah. I mean, you can only so much communicate through crying and screaming and smiling.
I think I've had 4 children, so by about the number 4, I really noticed that they speak a specific language even when they're really, really young. When when they're going to the toilet, when they're cold, when they're hungry, it's all got different pitches of screaming, if you know what I mean. So it's something that's not apparent when you have 1 or 2 because you think it's that. But the more you get more practice at hearing it, like, for example, childcare workers would know the certain pitch of what it means, pain pitch, if someone's getting bitten by an ant or something like that. It's really different, yeah, from one to the next. So.
Great example of, or not example, great observation of, so you can, you know, if you are a very sensitive mom, or the more sensitive you are, you can distinguish different pitches or tones of crying, meaning different aspects. And it has limitations, right? Yeah, I mean, it helps you to get the kind of the basics, but makes it really difficult to share ideas, to improve ideas, all of those things, yeah? So that's, you know, that's why language is so important. Because ultimately we are social creatures. And language, as we said before, that's, you know, our link to other human beings, to share our minds with other human beings. And then also our more complex thought processes are contingent on language skills. So, you know, the more our brain develops, you know, the more stuff you want to share as well. Yeah? And vice versa, you know, the more we're picking up in our environment, you know, the more we hear about, you know, what's said to us as well. So it becomes much more complex. And it gives us to all of the powers which we talked before. Really important. So this is why language progression, you know, and like that's why parents are always so eager to share and so proud, you know, when their children speak the first word or then the first sentence, you know, it's always a big thing, and it's very much interpreted as a sign of, you know, a healthy development and the child being well. Interestingly though also, and that's very often, you know, not known, is there's already a lot of stuff going on actually prenatal when the baby is in the mother's womb. So the sensory system and the basic auditory recognition is going, you know, is already developed then. So babies in the mother's womb can already pick up a lot of sounds. After the birth, then there has been a relatively rapid rate of language acquisition, and the textbook gives you a whole overview of what happens when. So we have developed a really good understanding of the actual process. And we have been able to identify that there are general stages of language acquisition, and that's fairly similar between children. However, there is also substantial differences in the trajectory of language skills between different cultures. And that potentially is influencing the thought patterns and perceptions, and we're going to have a bit of more of a look how that's playing out. Also, what's happening is we're specializing in the language. So here I got the right one. Simple. Everybody is. But sometimes I'm using those shortcuts, those symbols as shortcuts. So younger, that means younger than about 8 months. Yeah. We are basically sensitive to all sounds. You know, and we can also, you know, the way we can articulate all sounds. So it's kind of, yeah, you know, until about 8 months old, we are generalist. What happens then is children are specializing after that. So the more they are exposed to a particular language, the more they are developing the listening for that particular language and the articulation of that particular language. But this is why, you know, the specialization, why it's so difficult or so easy for children to pick up different languages, because they can, you know, can distinguish between them. Whereas if you pick up a language later, like me at, you know, 27, it is challenging. I just can't hear as a nuance the differences between, my favorite example, between job and chop. It's just it's just, I can't, and because I can't hear it, I can't say it either, unless I'm really concentrating. Or chi. When I say chi, people don't know what I mean. I mean that letter, like German. I can't hear I can't distinguish how it is pronounced in English, and it just can't. There's something in my system which produces the sound. It's just not getting out. Just was spelling my name this morning, so each time I was spelling my name, I'm getting it, you know, in that position. So yeah, but children, they're generalists. They can basically, you know, distinguish those nuances, but they lose this ability over time to specialize in their own language. That's basically what I just said. So it's difference in early exposure leads then also to different perceptual abilities and skills. So children exposed to tonal languages become skilled at detecting pitch differences. So, Chinese, for example, you know, it's the way you are saying, pronouncing, and pitching and toning particular words, totally different meaning. And it's really, really difficult to pick that up as a non-Chinese speaker or Mandarin speaker. It's just really so nuanced. Whereas for Mandarin speakers, it's very easy, of course. You know, that's the difference. And you know, so it's simple changes can profoundly change the message, what you're conveying. Grammatical structures also vary between cultures, which for example, English and German is the other way around, with the verb, object, and subject. And when I'm going back to Germany, very often I'm getting in the first couple of days, I'm basically speaking German with an English grammar, very much to the delight of my family, until I, you know, get used to the German structure. But it's, you know, it's just how entrenched it becomes. Now there's 3 different language or theories of language development. I think before we go there, because it's 5 to 10, how about we make a break now? So I give you enough opportunity to meet another student, a new student. So during the break, team up, just introduce yourself to another student and just have a conversation about, what, what you learned from the first hour about the power of language. And even if it is just, that you're surprised about it or actually nothing new about it. Yeah? So I see you back at 10 past 10, sorry. Yes. You said we Welcome back. I just had a look at the externals. We have 23 external students in the room. And the question, one of the questions was with the mid-semester quiz, does it include chapter 2 or not? So it doesn't include chapter 2. So the research chapter is not included in the test. The reason being is that I gave you different knowledge to what's actually in the textbook to give you a bigger overview of the different research approaches. And for those of you who are doing 1-for-1, you will have the same chapter again, and this time we will get much more into the nitty-gritty bits of the experimental, of the quantitative research methods. Yeah, and then you will also go into all the statistics and stuff, which in the latter part of the chapter. But there was no point in basically giving you the chapter twice for those ones who are doing 1-for-1. And as I said, I really wanted you to have the overview of quantitative and qualitative research and why we have these two approaches. So just that as a background. And then also there was the other question was whether the academic writing workshop is going to be recorded. Yes, it will be recorded. And we will make the link available on your online after the session has been done so that you can watch it in your own time. Good. Cool. Thanks so much for asking those questions to those excellent students. Great. So let's continue. So there's 3 theories of language development. The first one is biological. The second one is behaviorist. And then there's an emergentist perspective as well. So now your knowledge of the biological and behavioral perspectives, which we looked at in week 2, they come to the program, so you can now apply that to language development and see how those perspectives give us insights into how language develops. So the major proponent of the biological perspective is Chomsky, and from his perspective, humans neurologically are predisposed to develop language. So it's very much in our genes, basically, and we inherit it. The behaviorists are saying language is, Skinner is the one here, and you met Skinner already in the second week. So from his perspective, in alignment with his overall perspective, language is strengthened or weakened as a result of the consequences of environment. So remember, that's the conditioning, the punishment and reward, and positive and negative reinforcement. And then there is another perspective which basically says it's the dynamic interaction between inherited biology, environmental exposure, and social pressure. So it's a bit of both. So if you recognize that's the, as I said in the second lecture, in psychology we have this overarching debate going on about the influence of nature and nurture. So that's playing out in the series of language development as well. So from the behaviorist perspective, tone quickly becomes associated with praise or punishment. That's the behaviorist, yeah. So whenever you see the baby being held by hands, that's the symbol, which I'm using for the behaviorist because it's the nurturing, yeah. Sorry for the mistakes in writing. So it's punishment, praise and punishment. So the higher the pitches, then that's associated with encouragement, and lower pitches are scolding. This is why we also, as adults, are very sensitive to that still, yeah, because we basically got trained as babies. So changing in tone changes in behavioral responses. Research shows us that happy, rewarding tones elicit smiles in babies, whereas low warning tones elicit a cautious frown in babies. So babies are learning very, very fast to distinguish the pitch. Now then, from this perspective, how parents, in particular parents, interact with their babies is influencing language development. So the more encouraging and praising or elaborating on children's playing parents are, the earlier children accomplish those language milestones. Basically, the faster they learn a language. And apparently, while that is true for both for the mother and the dad, it's more so for the moms. However, then basically the nature can say, well, hold on, that environmental factors cannot account for the rapid development. Well, why is there, if it's all about in the environment, why is there suddenly such a rapid development? So from their perspective, they suggest that humans are neurologically predisposed to develop language, and that there is innate constraints that primarily influence language acquisition. So from the perspective of Chomsky, or from the leaves are nature, symbolic of nature, I'm thinking a lot that I'm actually selecting the picture, so there's always a link there. The language is biological and predetermined. Nativism, that's the belief that certain abilities are built into our brains. So our brain basically has evolved over time to allow for language. So it's kind of the human brain is ready to acquire language at birth. Because learning for children, learning a language very effortlessly. They're basically learning it, as they go on. And it's a huge volume of words and grammatical rules acquired to actually master a language. And as I remember, we are mastering language by the age of 3. So that's, that children, or we as children, are able to do that is astonishing and just can't be explained by just by environmental factors. So there must be somewhere we must have this ability inbuilt. Why this camp also thinks that it's nature is that there is actually the readiness for language acquisition doesn't last forever. There is a specific sensitive period in a child's life when children can particularly easily learn. And I'm going to come back to that. That language development is pretty much similar across cultures, also suggests that it's an inbuilt capability. So the sensitive period is less between 7 and 12 months. There is a really, the pickup is quite slow in language. And then suddenly after the 7 to 12 months, there is a shift, and children absorb words at a lightning pace until about 5 years. They are 5 years old, so there is this sensitive period. And during that sensitive period, there is an environmental stimulation required to promote healthy development. So that's where the behavioral perspective comes in, that during the sensitive period, the more parents or the environment in which children are growing up are stimulating, are encouraging and elaborating using language, the more the child learns about the language and the faster. So biology has constrains the ability to learn languages after early development. Again, everybody who learns a different language after the sensitive period, it is difficult. Unless, you already learned another language. So it's actually easier. Research shows that those children who already learned a second language or more languages during the sensitive period, for them then it's easier to learn another language. This is very often why you have people who are good in speaking several languages. That happens typically if they grow up in a bilingual environment. So there's a genetic predisposition creates language, but environmental factors then specialize language advancement, so it can either hinder or facilitate language advancement. So the argument basically goes that babies have a preference for speech sounds, and babies can discriminate between phonemes, and I'm going to say a little bit more what that is. But they can actually better distinguish between them, so they are much more sensitive to learning languages, and there's an initial flexibility to learn any language, as I said before. So from the behaviorist perspective, then speech development is dependent on our exposure to and familiarity with our native language. So that's where the specialization comes in. Yeah. So the environment influences how we are specializing, in which language we are specializing. And researchers at the moment are looking into discovering the limitations of the neurological system. How much does it enable us to develop language, and how much does it also limit us? And which situations allow for language to develop best, so that we can facilitate language development in children. The biology helps to explain developmental constraints, and the behaviorist model of operant conditioning gives us an insight into how we can facilitate language development. But also there is social exposure can help explain individual differences in growth. So basically, the more we are interacting as children with other people, and obviously then the more language we are exposed to, the more we are speaking as well. And different people using different words as well means more stimulation and hence more language development. So basically both perspectives are valuable, and they're actually complementing each other. And researchers, as I said, are refining the ways in which they both interact. So just reflecting on what I have been saying, that how nature and nurture are giving us different insights into how language develops. What perspective resonates most with you? And that just leaves you to ponder about that. So let's go into language and brain. As I said before, that language, different areas in the brain are connected with language. So there's basically two main areas that contribute to language development and processing. That's the Broca's area and the Wernicke's area. So those two are the main areas which have been identified. But if you can see, there's lots of areas in between the different brain areas. So there's a lot of interaction going on as well, but that's the two main areas which have been identified. So the Broca's area is the inability, or what has been identified in this area is damaged. There is a difficulty or an inability to produce speech. So that's also called then the Broca's aphasia and non-fluent aphasia. So what that basically suggests, given that people who have this area damaged, that they can't produce or have difficulties to produce speech, means that this area is necessary for the production of language. And what researchers believe is that there may be a module in the brain to controlling speech. So also what that means is, because it's this area is located in the left hemisphere, that language production is mainly influenced and controlled by the left hemisphere of the brain. So this area is also crucial for information synthesization and language production. That's not only language production, but also synthesizing language as well, making those connections. Which then in the end enables us to create complex communication with each other. Then there's Wernicke's aphasia or fluent aphasia. So that's distinguish between the non-fluent and the fluent aphasia. So that's the prosody or melody of the speech pattern stays intact when this area is damaged. But the ability to convey meaning is damaged. So this area, together with other areas of the temporal lobe, contribute to processing and differentiating understandable sounds from non-sensical noises. And that's the area where we basically comprehend and organize incoming information and to attach meaning for it. So this area is the area where which allows us to make meaning of the incoming information. Now those two areas together then allow us to develop a mental lexicon, and I referred to that before. So consider that we all have this mental lexicon, as we had that great example with the water. So we have lots, we are storing in our brains a lot of words and associated concepts. So the word being water, and then we had the program as a whole word behind that. So that's the different concepts associated with that. And we are storing all of that in our brains. Now the average human, that's late. I was going to ask you for your estimates, but I withdrew that one. So the average human has in their brains between 50,000 and 100,000 words, which is massive, right, if you think about it. However, also the size of our mental lexicons varies greatly. But typically we are capable of about 5,000 words in speech and in about 10,000 words in writing. Now for a college-educated student like yourself and higher, so the more you're studying, the more words you're learning. Hence, you have a large mental lexicon. So that's about 800,000 words, not 80,000 words. Now, interestingly, because you're always looking to Shakespeare, Shakespeare knew approximately 66,000 words. So considering that we are now by about 80,000 words for college-educated students, I think we are doing pretty well. And also what's astonishing, it takes us about 80 milliseconds to fully recognize a word. Sorry, I have to change that. I don't know what the within. So within 80 milliseconds, we are basically recognizing a word. So we are processing really, really fast. But then we have to understand those words, we have to transfer sounds and symbols into meaning, and that's where it becomes really interesting. As you said before, we have verbal and non-verbal communications, and the starting points are those sounds and symbols, but then we have to turn them into meanings. So symbols are arbitrary, right? As you said before, if I say something, it's a chair, somebody else might see it as firewood. So why do we call objects as we do, is then the question. And I think that's, if you start thinking about that question, it triggers a whole lot of inquiry. So language, I invite you to consider that language is processed hierarchically to convey meaning. And it's processed very quickly and unconsciously, otherwise you wouldn't be able to assign meaning so fast to symbols and sounds. And we are organizing it basically, the sounds which are coming in, we are organizing them using the phonemes. So that's the smallest unit of sound information. It's basically the sound a letter represents. That's your phonemes. And then you have the morphemes, and that's the smallest unit of language comprehension. So that's the smallest standalone portion of a word, because that gives you access to the meaning of a word. So we quickly link that information, which is semantically similar and connected by the word's meaning. Given that we have, that we are bombarded with so much information each day, we have to find ways of basically being effective in processing all of that information. If you wouldn't, we would go crazy, right? So we have to sift out, and find the similarities between things. So that's basically where semantic networks are coming in. So we are not only storing the words and the meaning of those words or the associated concepts, but we are storing them in a very organized way. Yeah? I mean, imagine, if we would have all the words we have chunkled basically up. So only because we organize them in a network, which means we are looking at what's the connections between those different words and the concepts we associate with it. That allows us fast access to, if somebody says water, that we can access all of those different meanings. Because the semantic networks then allow us to put words in a context, to retrieve the relevant responses, but also to detect errors in the usage as well. And I'm going to explain that a bit more. So Wittgenstein, who very famous philosopher, so we don't store, he said that we don't store the exact definition of items. We store the general sense of information and define category membership. So we connect it to other concepts. Yeah. So in your case, it was in Deborah's case, it was all the concepts connected to water. Yeah. And because Deborah has in her, and we will see that later on, in all of those connections are basically very well developed, which allow her to access it faster. Now, whatever came first to her, all those images or associations, they are stronger connected to the word water, whereas those latter ones were less connected. So that's where the hierarchy comes in. So it's basically a the storage of a port and connected map of related information. So it's all about the interconnectedness between these different concepts. Because also, consider that there is somewhere, all of those concepts we are storing, there is an overlap in one way or another. So that's basically how it looks like in our brain, but much more complex, obviously, right? So it's all of those connections, and this is also why mind mapping. When you are making maps, a mind map of your chapters, for example, is really a good strategy to remember new information, because it basically resembles our semantic network map in our brain's lexicon anyway. Yeah. Already had that. I just had it earlier. So then the next question is, how does language influence thinking? So thought influences language, but also language influences thought. So it's not a one-way relationship, it's always a two-way interactive relationship. And it's a little bit like the egg and the chicken, right? It's really difficult to say what comes first because they are so closely connected with each other. So there's many different approaches to how people perceive and think about the self and the world, and that's why in the second week, I had to distinguishing that we all see the world differently. Now, language then influences our approach to thinking, because it gives us access to some aspects, but also doesn't give us access to other aspects. And that really, people who are bilingual or multilingual have a really good sense of that, because they can utilize different approaches to thinking. So my thinking is different when I'm accessing German as opposed to English, because there's different symbols basically available to me. One of the examples is the Germans have a word Geborgenheit, yeah, and Geborgenheit doesn't exist. The word doesn't exist in English. It's not there, which means it basically is not existent for English speakers, because it's not there as a word in language. Yeah. Now I can convey the word or the meaning of Geborgenheit to English speakers, but it will take me, it takes me a bit to explain it. So what it basically means is the sense, it's my interpretation, it's the sense of, which you have as a little baby in your mother's arm. It's this sense of being safe, of being accepted, and being held and supported. Yeah? So it takes me a couple of words, and I'm still thinking, I'm not sure whether that actually really conveys the meaning of the word Geborgenheit. Yeah? Now that's just one word. Now consider that different languages are making available different things. And we give you a couple of more examples later. Oh, actually now. Oh, yeah, later. Or maybe not. Okay, give it to you now. So indigenous languages, there were 290 different languages, indigenous languages in Australia before the white settlement. That's a lot of languages. Now, the biggest difference though between indigenous languages and Western languages is that indigenous languages very much are interconnected, so there are a lot of concepts in the way which language is used is connecting people with each other or concepts with each other. So for example, when you introduce yourself to another person, you're using language like I'm related to, I'm part of this tribe, I'm such and such mother's, I'm the mother of blah blah blah, and the auntie to blah blah blah, right? So it's always in everything which is in indigenous languages is always emphasizing the connectedness between the different elements, or the connectedness between human beings and nature is very much in the language, ingrained in the language. Or, for example, we have in English, we have as a language for the seasons, we have spring, summer, autumn, winter. Now, if you ask yourself, what does that actually mean? Now, to each of those words, right, you will have a particular sense, like before water, you will have a word behind summer, for example, and all the things which come to mind to summer. However, that's your particular interpretation. Whereas in indigenous languages, each season is very much defined by the connection to nature. How does nature look at a particular time of the season? What is in flower? What is, what kind of animals are eatable, or flowers are eatable in the season. So it's all connected. Now, our language doesn't have that. English, right? Hence, us as, we are not thinking connectedness to nature. Whereas in indigenous languages, it's ingrained in there that everything is connected to nature. And by speaking it, each time we are speaking it, it connects us to people or connects us to nature. Make sense? No? No? Yes, that's exactly right. Yeah, that is exactly right. So by indigenous people, talking about, if we in Western cultures we introduce ourselves by saying, I am Petra and I'm an academic and I have a degree in blah blah blah. Yeah. Now that creates a certain word about, even how you see me, but also it very much disconnects me from other people. Whereas if I'm introducing myself in language or in indigenous communities, I'm introducing myself in, my auntie is Shuliniparandi, and that's the tribe, and that automatically makes me, the auntie to or the grandmother to, you know. And then people who are, people who I never met, right, come to me and say, "Oh, auntie." I'm like, But suddenly, you know, I'm connected to everybody. And then I'm thinking connectedness. Can you see? Yeah?
It's sort of about how what your culture construct is the hierarchy of the person.
Yeah, absolutely.
That to describe our world.
Yes, yes. So it very much is connected to what's valued in a particular society. So if it is valued to live, you know, to be interconnected with each other and with nature, then that is reflected in language. But then this language reinforces that constantly. Yeah? Great. Because it's amazing, you know, once you get the hang of that. Yeah, different languages, different thoughts. Yes, that's exactly right. Yeah. Yeah, so because in Western cultures, the way we are talking to each other and how we are talking with each other creates a world of pretty much separation from each other and being individualistic and separation from nature. Indigenous people, connectedness to other people, and connectedness to nature. And then language reinforces that. Yeah? Yeah, it creates literally different languages, creates different rules. Yeah. However, not only different rules, different actions. Yeah? Because if I'm constantly reminded of that I'm interconnected with everybody else and with nature, hey, I'm going to look after those relationships. Yeah? But if my language doesn't make that available for me, it reinforces being separate from nature and being separate from each other, then my actions will be also not looking after nature and believing and thinking it's okay to exploit nature because I'm not present to those interconnections. Yeah? And just we had this question before. If you're, if you're deaf and mute, what happens then? I have to get back to you on that one because that's a really, so there is studies where children grew up in wildness. I think I can't remember the age, but it was really, it was really difficult to recover the language. Now with the language then is the thinking connected because the brain processes, the cognitive processes are connected. But I'll get back to you next week on that. Yeah? Thanks. Yeah. The understanding of different languages and hence different worlds. Yeah, absolutely. This is why, it's very often said that to really understand the culture, you need to learn the language. Yeah. So language shapes perception and thought. So it can alter one's perception and understanding of reality and maybe mirrored in thought patterns, or language may be mirrored in thought patterns influencing attention. So also, what we attend to, as we just said, what we remember and our way of reasoning as well. So we just covered all of those ones. Now there's then also very simple, examples as well. Color. So Russians divide color, for example, the blue color spectrum more precisely. Now, unfortunately, the book doesn't give you what that actually makes available. But there will be a reason why Russians developed distinguishing more blue colors. So I have to find out about that as well. Also, references of time and space differ based on cultural language patterns as well, and that can, influence how we perceive time, location, and direction. Give you an example here of Australians, indigenous people again. So interestingly, if I say to you fire and controlled burning, you probably just think of one type of fire, yeah. Indigenous people actually have distinguished that much more precisely. So they distinguish young fire, and they connect it to the developmental stages of people, which is very interesting. So young fire is thin, cool, and needing more care, feeding and protecting. So it's like a child, yeah? Then you have Rashkar fire is the hot adolescent fire that is tall, rangy, awesomeness, restless, and energetically consuming all that the timber inside and leaving the moment it has burned its way. Yeah. Then there's the fire that turns into slower fire that is more mature, thoughtful, thinking fire. So it's starting more carefully what to burn off. That fire is the socially useful fire of middle age and is encouraged by people to burn the land. So that's the mature fire, is because it's basically only consuming what it needs to consume, rather than consuming it all. That's what's used by indigenous people for burning off. And then there's the elder fire that is soft, generous, and giving warm comfort. That is the memory of fire that lingers for days in one place. Yeah, so a much more refined, nuanced understanding of different types of fire, but also then connecting it to humans. Again, it's the interconnection there, right? So as soon as I talk about fire that way, I can't help them feeling connected to fire. And then Inuits have lots of different words for snow, right? Now that also has survival value. If you live in snowy conditions, the more you can distinguish different types of snow, the more you can again connect how to respond to this type of snow. So the way people think is a mirror of language, and language creates thinking. So it's a two-way interactions. And abstract concepts require language, call attention to different information. And thought can occur independently of language by visualizing. So really the message is watch your words because they create words. Yeah. Okay, let's stop there. So maybe you can, because I'm very much aware that there's, people from different cultures here as well. So maybe you can, find another person from a different culture and talk about, the different aspects maybe you noticed by learning English, and how, how different languages create the world. So I see you back at 11 o'clock. Okay, welcome back. We just had a very good conversation with a couple of students outside, and the idea was, one student asked, so would it then make sense, given that we have a sensitive period for learning languages, between 12 months to 5 years, would it then make sense to expose children to a other language during this period, sensitive period? And absolutely yes. So having children during kindergarten exposed to other languages is really important, but also points to the importance of migrant parents to really ensure that they're speaking their native language at home is really important, because then children during that time especially learn the language very effortlessly. Yeah? And why we don't do that as a society? Obviously, psychologists haven't been very good in communicating that, or society not very good in picking it up. But definitely kindergartens being teaching another language, or being fully conversing in one language would be really useful. Good. Right. Now let's go to thought, after we have been spending quite a bit of time on language. So what's thinking? We do it all the time. What is it? Yes. Problem solving? Yes, absolutely. That's one aspect. What else? Processing information? Absolutely. Yes. What else? So by processing information, we also mean not just hearing information, but doing something with the information. Creating meaning, yes. Interpreting the information we are getting in. Even selecting the information we are allowing in. Filtering, yeah, absolutely. Guys, I don't know what happens with you here on the left side. Those guys in the middle and on the right, winning out big time today. Yay, save them. Pardon? Interpreting? Feeling? Tell me a bit more about that. If it's you have been doing some thinking there. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Okay, so assessing how you're feeling. Yeah. Yeah. Good. No, got it. I got it. Good. Great. Yes. So you could even, say, becoming aware of how you're actually feeling. Yeah. Yeah. It's been so funny. A couple of you could also to the other side. Sorry. Okay, let's have a look. So as I said, I'm always like going back to what's actually the root of the word saying. It's actually imagining, conceiving in the mind, to consider, to remember, to wish and desire, to seem, to appear, to think and feel. It's a whole lot of stuff, and it's problem solving, decision making, reasoning. So perceiving, when you're perceiving something, you're forming a mental representation, as we said before, right? And you're naming the thing, and then you're remembering, and you bring mental representations to mind. So we perceive what's happening, but then, like Deborah, when I ask you for, or other way around, Deborah would have perceived a lot of different ways of using water or connected to water. And then I asked her to remember all of them. So she had to bring all those mental representations she formed throughout her life, basically, and bring it to the foreground so that she could share with us. So thinking then is manipulating mental representations for purpose. So we have this mental representations, the lexicon of the mind, in our minds. Now the thinking is actually manipulating all of those mental representations for purpose. Mostly problem solving and answering questions. Because that's, as human beings, that's what you basically face going through life. You know, that we are encountering new situations and we have to solve the challenges or make decisions about something. So we think using words and language. So mental representation, as I said, you know, that's all the stuff in our minds, and we can manipulate any kind of representations in our mind. Of course, they're existing in our mind, and but in reality, now everything which is in our minds we can manipulate. Now, typically, what's in our minds happens, as we know from Freud, to a large degree unconsciously. Yeah. So the first access to thinking is actually, you know, you can only manipulate something if you are aware of something. So the first phase or aspect of thinking is actually becoming aware of your mental representations. But also we, as we said before, we are mostly thinking in words and images. So mental images are visual representations, and mental models are representations that describe, explain, or predict how self and the world works. So this is also why, you know, the visual aspect of thinking is so important. You know, when you told us about water, can you tell me what happened in your mind? Oh, sorry.
It's hard to think of. I think it's almost automatic. So I guess you just think of associations to water, importance, relevance to your life or others' lives. That's all I can think of. Yeah. Yeah.
And you know, was it more words or was it more images? Did you see actually, when you thought about water, or did you see
combination. Combination. I'm a very visual learner, so the longer it went, the more I thought in pictures or things like that. Yeah. But initially just words, I think. Yeah.
Cool. So that's
exactly what I mean, right? So we have, you know, words, and we have also the visual representations in our minds. And it's interesting that you said the longer it went on, the more visual images came actually into mind. So if you're listening to your own thinking, what's happening in your mind, and I invite you to try it out at home and have somebody basically telling you a word, and you, like I did with Deborah, and you're thinking about it. What happens in your mind? And you will discover that it is visual or mental models come to your mind. And that's exactly right. Yeah, yeah. This is why pictures are so powerful as well, because it just combines them so much. And as they say, a picture speaks 1,000 words. So we store what we perceive as concepts, but also as visuals as well. And then, hence, when you remember them, it comes back as that as well. So it's, also those mental representations are from simple to complex. And I think, with you, the more you went on, the more complex it became, right? And then you said, I can't remember exactly what it was, but you said that can have this consequence or that consequence. So you started distinguishing more and more. Exactly. And you also include relationships among the elements. Remember, that's the symbolic and semantic networks. It's always the relationship between the different elements as well. So basically, mental models are deeply held internal images of how the world works, images that limit us to familiar ways of thinking and acting, where often we are not consciously aware of our mental models or the effects they have on our behavior. So that's, remember what Freud said, the iceberg, right? Most of what you're thinking is unconscious. But nevertheless, so, you know, for Deborah, she basically told us everything she was conscious of. Now, there would have been a whole lot of associations with the word water, which she is not conscious of, which is in her unconsciousness. Now, the more we would dig, the more would bring them out. But, you know, it would take longer. But nevertheless, you know, all those mental models or representations are influencing how you're thinking, but also how you're acting. So we develop basically a theory of mind. You know, each of us is busy of developing our own theory of who we are and how life works. Yeah? So that's the, you know, like the, you know, discussed last week, you know, that psychologists systematically research and develop theories and test them. As individuals, we have our own theory. And we constantly develop this theory and we constantly test it and refine it. And those theories of mind enable us recognizing that others have different thoughts, beliefs, and feelings as well. So given that, you know, each of us is developing this theory and has different experiences, we all have a different theory of mind. And it is critical basically for our ability to successfully interact with others. Also, by the way, you know, as we established in week 2, the more we are conscious that each of us has different theories in our minds, the more we can then also become curious about each other's theories of minds. And the more we do, the more the better we will be able to interact. Asperger's syndrome is basically a deficit of theory of mind, which then makes it challenging to interact, or we have to find other ways of interacting with people with Asperger's. But then again, you know, they see different things than we. We can't see many things. Yep.
As we've been going through this lecture today, I was just thinking how difficult and how much of a disadvantage it is to those. 3 of my children have Asperger's. And we are very, in our household, you know, very pragmatic and very clear about our language because of that. And I think of the difficulties there must be just not on the same page, you know, when communicating with other people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a great example of, you know, how challenging it is to communicate across. If you don't, you know, have that or have a very different theory of mind, yeah, or don't know about it, that's exactly right. So it becomes very challenging. Also because it's so much outside of our experience. Yeah. So it's great that this, you know, has come up as we were talking about it. So basically what we're doing then, we develop concepts and categories. Because as I said, you know, given that we have like between 50,000 and 100,000, you know, words in our vocabulary, and then all the associated concepts with that, we have to organize them. So to think about an object, people have to classify objects based on their properties so that they know what it is and what it does. So a concept is a mental representation of a class of objects, ideas, or events that share common properties. So the emphasis here is that they need to share a common property. Categories then are groups based on common properties. So categorization is identifying objects as instance of a category and recognizing similarities, which is essential to thinking and allows us to make inferences. So it's not, we are not, you know, each time we encounter something, we are not encountered as something separate. We are encountering it as something. We're constantly comparing back to other instances, or we're looking for how is it similar to something else we already experienced or have stored in our theory of mind or mental lexicon. Sorry. So we are comparing features of an object with defining features stored in our memory, in our map. And so there's a need to be present to classify objects as members of a category. Works very well with defined features, but most concepts are not easily defined. And it's also very slow. People typically assess fast. So how we're getting around as human beings is we're utilizing a prototype. That's an abstraction based on shared features across many instances of a category. Bear with me, I will explain later what it actually means or how it looks like. So a prototype is basically a typical example of the most important features. Typically, we use a combination of visual images, as I said, and information as well. And then we develop a hierarchy of those concepts to make it even easier for us to distinguish. So many concepts are hierarchically ordered based on the level of abstraction, which helps us solving problems. So if you take this one, so we have dogs, cats, and possums, right? Now then we have, if you go, that's a hierarchy. So dog, cats, and possums are part of mammals. They're all mammals, but then obviously we can distinguish different dogs or types of dogs, and we can distinguish different types of cats or possums, right? So then when we are then encountering a new animal, right? We are basically then comparing the features of this new animal to features of what we already have stored in our minds about animals. And so we are going then, very fast to comparing it. First of all, is it a mammal or is it something else? Or then if it is a mammal, what type is it? Right, so we're going through that categorization. Now, that makes our thinking more efficient. And let's go through that. But the question is, could it be dangerous to categorize? It helps us being efficient, but could it be dangerous? There's a smile there. Do you want to answer?
Well, I was just thinking about a certain kind who has a rigid perception of men and has basically, because of bad experiences in relationships, written off the possibility that they can be good men.
Absolutely. So, one example, and then transferring that to all of men, and then suddenly all men are not trustworthy. Yeah. Now, dangerous because obviously, not all men are not trustworthy. Yeah. So that's one of those dangers. Great example. It's called also stereotyping. Yeah. So that's basically, the classical example of stereotyping. So why is categorization is really important? It's always and makes us helps us making us more efficient in our thinking. Always also to look, is it really true? Does it really apply to all men, for example? Give you another example, humans, right? Let's say there's Australian, Germans, and another culture. Now, what are categorization saying about Australians? Give me a couple of things, especially those non-Australians. Pardon? Bogan? Swear a lot? Laid back? That was an Australian. Other? What? Surfing, yeah. Great. So nature, lots of nature stuff, right? Nature activities. look like models, apparently. Dump and talk like bogans. Nation of blokes, and same as Kiwis or New Zealanders. And that's the danger of stereotypes, because there's always exemptions, right? Germans.
Hardworking.
Hardworking, yes.
Rule following.
Pardon?
Rule following. They follow rules.
Oh, rule following. Yeah, they follow rules, absolutely. Efficient? What? Beer. Oh, beer. They're drinking lots of beer, yeah. I'm probably the only German who doesn't. But, you know, so many times I got told, you know, you must love beer, and we're like, no. No small talk, we are very serious. No sense of humor. Just they don't understand our humor, right? Hardworking, punctual, and loving order. Rule following, absolutely. So you could, you know, we have, you know, we categorize people from a particular culture, and we have our, you know, characteristics with which we associate with them. Now, that's all fine, right? And it helps us to, you know, distinguish people from different cultures. It just becomes dangerous if we are inflexible and we can't recognize that for, you know, that different people in a culture are different. And as long as we can allow it to be open, then that's all fine. Categorization is fine. But without openness, if we basically are right about our categorizations, that can become very dangerous, as we just heard in with men. Or, you know, we could have a reaction if we encounter a German or if we encounter an Australian. Yeah. So really, wise categorization are really important and useful. They need to be coupled with an open mind. Now, how do we then manipulate mental representations? So people manipulate current and new information with information stored in the memory to reason, to solve problems and make decisions. So reasoning is the process of creating and evaluating arguments and beliefs. Problem solving is the process of transforming one situation into another to meet a goal. And decision making is the process of weighing up the pros and the cons of alternatives. So that's the three main types in which we're thinking or manipulating mental representations. Now, the way we are reasoning is basically, and that's Western cultures, right? Not in other cultures. Asian cultures and indigenous cultures have a very different way of reasoning. So I'm only giving you the Western one. Now, does that look familiar to you guys? Yes? Who thinks, you know, it looks familiar? Yay, where have you seen it before? Last week, exactly. That's the two main. What? Oh. Qualitative and quantitative. Yay, cool, awesome. That's exactly right. In Western cultures, we have exactly the same way we are reasoning when we are reasoning with in research. So research is more systematically, but it's inductive and deductive, and we constantly do it without even thinking about it. So basically, just go for it because it's the same like last week, right? Just be aware that you are also using induction and deduction in the way you are reasoning. Now, Western and Eastern cultures have different rules of logic. The Western culture's law of non-contradiction valued. So as soon as we experience contradictions in Western cultures, we want to resolve those contradictions. Yeah, drives us nuts sometimes, but that's what we're trying to do. So if statements contradict each other, only one can be true from the Western perspective. And we need to try those paradoxes. Whereas Eastern cultures accept and value actually contradictions. Believe both statements contain wisdom, and they relish paradox and focus on finding the wisdom in each. Yeah? So very different type of logic, which is really important, or reasoning logic. So that's why it's also really important if you are aware of that, you know, interacting with Eastern culture, if you are aware that as coming from a Western culture, it's difficult for us to be with paradoxes, then, you know, we might be, and that Eastern cultures are more able to basically be with both without having to resolve it, and can get the value from both, then we can be much more appreciative of that rather than making it wrong. Yeah. Then also we are engaging in analogical reasoning. So people understand novel situations in terms of familiar ones. Again, you know, that's going back basically to our mental representation of our lexicon of the mind. And we use those analogies to categorize novel situations and making inferences into the problem. So basically, if we have a problem, we compare it. Have you experienced this situation before? How, if yes, how have you resolved it in the past? And then we apply that to the new situation. As we will see later, that can be useful, but it can also be tremendously limiting and actually hinder us from solving the problem, because it's limiting us just to seeing it in the problem in particular ways. Familiar and novel situation must contain similar elements that can easily be mapped onto each other, and the elements must relate in ways that explain how situations are similar. So that also means that we are in trouble if we encounter something which we haven't experienced before, where there is we can't recognize similarity. Now in that case, then we have to basically come up with new ways of thinking. So this in analogical reasoning influences inferences and conclusions to other people by using analogies to reach own goals. That brings us to problem solving. So reasoning, problem solving, right, and decision making, the three elements of thinking. So problem solving is the process of transforming current unsatisfying situations into future satisfying states. Now also to meet a goal. Now the current unsatisfying situations is not only the initial situation, but it's also actually a motivating situation. Because if you are not happy with, you know, our current situation, then that motivates us to do something about it. Yeah? And also, as we know from a particular perspective, goals are really important to propel us into developing our capabilities. Which perspective is that? Goals. The importance of goals. Humanistic, exactly. Yeah. Typically, problem solving is a sequential process. So we compare the situation we are currently experiencing and the goal state to identify the difference. So what's the difference between what I'm experiencing now and where I actually want to be? And then we identify possible actions or strategies to solve the problem, and then we select the one most likely to solve the problem or challenge. And then obviously we apply the action and establish sub-goals. And we continue to apply those actions until differences between initial and goal state are eliminated, which means we basically found the solution. Now influencing factors, so it's not quite as simple as that, right? Because otherwise we would always fulfill our goals without any problems. But there's a lot of influencing factors on this process. So it's the nature of the problem, the approach we are taking to the problem, past experiences, our general knowledge, the way we approach the problem, and the available strategies. So there might be, strategies which are really, would work really well, but they are not available to us. Then obviously we can't use them. So that means that very few problems are straightforward and easily solved. Also, most problems are very ill-defined. The information needed for solving are very vague very often, and the criteria for determining the goals are very vague as well. So you might have at the moment, being in a state of, okay, in this unit or in my studies in general, right, it's challenging for me to keep up with my weekly tasks. Now, you recognize that this won't be giving you the, if you're not keeping up, right, this will mean that you are less likely to pass the unit, yeah? But then, so you can maybe, recognize the problem, but what is really happening here? So it's a very vague definition of, okay, I'm not keeping up. But then you have to dig deeper into how come I'm not keeping up. Yeah, so you have to try to define the problem much more specifically. And then also, to look, is it, what's my goal? So is it just passing the unit? Is it, accomplishing C's or D's, or is it accomplishing HDs? And what does that mean? What's part of that goal? So typically we are starting very often at with defining goals and defining the problem very vague. So it's really important to start defining the problem and the goal much more specifically, because the more specifically we can basically identify what's going on, the better our problem solving will be. So the problem strategies or techniques that serve as guides for solving a problem. First of all, algorithms. So that's systematic procedures or rules that inevitably produce a solution. Oops, just had that. Oh, didn't take out that was the old slide. So we have algorithms and mental simulation to solve problems. So algorithms are systematic or precise sets of rules that inevitably produce a solution. But there's also individual differences to applying those algorithms, and also the environment dictates which algorithm we apply. So there's a couple of different algorithms we can use or we identified which people are using. The first one is trial and error, right? So you experience a problem and you trial a strategy to solve it. And if it doesn't work, you try another one. If it doesn't work, you try another one, right? Until you find the solution which actually works or the strategy which works. But that takes a long time, right? It's feasible and you can do it, but it takes a long time. So what people then develop to speed up the process of problem solving is they use heuristics. And that basically helps shortcut lengthy judgment and decision making, and it also simplifies the information. So the mean end heuristic is it's always difficult to say. It's one of those language words which are really difficult for me to pronounce. So we envisage desired goals and take whatever actions to reach the goal. That's the Hobbit and Orc problem you have in the book. So if you go, the book is really good in that because it lets you get through this. So really encourage you to do the Hobbit and Orc problem. So you have basically the task of moving the hobbits and the orcs over to the other side. Yeah. So you have that as the end goal. So this heuristic basically only works when you actually have an end goal, but sometimes we have actually no end goal in mind. Sometimes we just know what the problem is, but they actually don't know what our goal would be, right? Then there's the representative heuristic, and in that heuristic what you're doing is you mentally compare something to the stored prototype of the event or object or person, and that's where we can, potentially also run into problems if we are stereotyping. So that was, the example the book gives you is lawyers and engineers. So you're basically, if, you're applying everything which you have stored in your lexicon or your semantic network to solving the problem, and but it can backfire because not everybody adheres to the characteristics of an engineer or a lawyer. And then you have availability heuristic. That's assessing the frequency or likelihood of occurrences based on how easily instances come to us. So the easier, basically, some information comes to us, the more we assume that's the correct one. That's the correct strategy, or that's the correct solution to the problem. But that's not necessarily true either. The book gives you the examples of sharks on beaches in Australia, right? So there's a lot of information, and there's sensational information about sharks, and that very much sticks to people's minds. But actually, sharks are not necessarily the most dangerous aspect of going to the beach. It's just that is because it's so emotionally connected information and so scary information. It's stored, or the high path, the mental highway is so much ingrained that it comes first to us. But that means then we neglect other information which actually would be more useful. Yeah. So why is, again, like with categorization, why is heuristics can be very valuable? You also need to be really discriminative about using them, because sometimes they can backfire. Yeah. Now, mental stimulation is that where we are mentally basically solving issues before implementing by imagining alternative pathways to achieve a goal and the steps involved in solving the issue. So we are basically working it out in our minds. It's also very much, looking at scenarios. What's the different scenarios in each situation? So we have a problem. If you go down that route, what would happen? If you go down that route, what would happen? What would be the consequences? It's more beneficial than visualizing desired outcomes, because it gives you actually actionable pathways. And research shows that it increases the self-efficacy of the problem solving and is much more productive coping strategies, which apparently is more the reason for males. They know why that is. So really the road to success is to set goals, to identify ways to achieve the goals, to feel in control of learning and work independently and collaboratively, and to also feel accountable for achieving your goals. So with that in mind, what elements would the road to success in this unit involve for you? Here I invite you to just talk, just team up with the person next to you, and based on what you just heard about problem solving, what strategy would be useful for you to use to success in this unit? I give you 2 minutes each. Yeah, and you might need to move. Switch if you haven't yet. Okay, stop. Cool. Thanks so much for engaging, and especially for those ones who had to move to find somebody else to talk to. What did you come up with? Somebody wants to share?
Okay, so we. Okay, sorry. Yep. So we were just saying the things on the slide before this obviously would be useful. The idea of actually making the goal first, rather than, as we were saying, limiting, we haven't got time, rather than that, think, okay, what do we need to do, what are the steps we need to take, and do that. To identify those things that we actually need to do and that will help, and to not waste time worrying. I guess we all do that to an extent, but to actually plan, kick off, you said, yeah.
Awesome. Did you want to add anything? Great, thanks. I remember.
Is this in relation to this class? Is that what you were saying? Yeah. So to have a timetable every week of when you've got your study and stick to that timetable, realistic timetable.
That's a good idea. Somebody else?
I think students should get study as well as other things should be balanced, like getting outside for outdoors, having fun, so they don't get depressed and they could concentrate on study for a long time.
Right.
So you're saying to not only study but to have a good balance of the other things which you can use as a reward and to do things which you love, like being in nature and having fun. Okay, to give the mind a rest as well. And we will see now how important that actually is.
Cool, thanks. I give you a couple of more pointers. Oh, actually, before you go, so yes, if you go, it's good to have strategies to how to solve problems, but we also discovered a couple of barriers for people, which people typically encounter when they are solving problems. So our problem solving is far from perfect because past experiences and expectations can narrow our ability to conceive new and novel situations. So consider that the ideas you came up with when you shared with another student. If you really look, it's probably more the same of what you have been doing in the past. Yeah. So there might be, a little bit of improvement, but not really, very different strategies to how you have been studying, for example, in the past. Might be improvements, but not really different. And that's really due to two reasons. The first one is mental set, and the other one is functional fixedness. So the mental set is your expectations of how to solve a problem, prevents you from keeping, means you're keeping using problem-solving strategies that worked in the past, more or less. And that can create a fixation, or set, which is also called a set effect. So just keep in mind that very often we approach solving a problem how we have been solving it in the past, and that's limiting. It's not wrong, it's just limiting. Something else would be possible. Also, very often we have a functional fixedness. And that means that we're ignoring possible functions of an object when we have those fixed functions in mind, which limits us from using the object for the purpose outside of the normal use. So the textbook gives you the example of how to use a matchbox, and the candle, yeah? But there's also, as you had earlier today, the chair could be used as a chair, but it could also be used as a firewood. Now, if you would, sit in front of, if you're cold, but you're being fixed to a chair is only there for sitting, it wouldn't occur to you that you could also use it as a firewood, yeah? So that's just very simple examples of how it influences you. And children are really good in breaking the rules there. They are very often reminding us, hey, hello, there's other functions to objects as well. So just keep in mind that those two barriers are very often working when we are trying to solve problems. Now, where real shifts come in problem solving is when we're actually shifting and manipulating our mental representations. So it's to rethink the problem and to really see the problem from a totally different perspective, to restructure or represent the problem differently. And that can also mean that you're reusing information and making new connections between those informations. So it's going outside of our used environment and to look at things from a totally different perspective. Now there is actually a process which you can use, which creates much more creative solutions to problems, because it gives you the space to let go of what you already know. And that's very often actually the first step, to say, okay, well, yes, I could, solve the problem I have with the information from the past, but I can also, put that aside and try to see it from the problem from a totally different perspective. So typically we can, gather knowledge and gain proficiency within a topic. So the more you know, obviously, it gives you different perspectives on things. And also what it does is that more expertise allows us to focus on important aspects. Now that means also that grouping and chunking information more efficiently creates more space in our minds and hence greater recall. This is why it is so important to create mind maps, for example, of your chapters, because you're grouping and chunking the information. Remember, you're building, your networks in your mind, which we're doing naturally anyway. But it does mean that it's much easier for you to recall those information and to store them. And think ahead and plan multiple moves. So it's a little bit like the playing of the chess. So if you actually give yourself the freedom, to say, okay, so that's the challenge I have, that's the problem I have. What could be different solutions to this problem be? Not only having a plan B but also plan C or plan D. Now, if you're actually trying to think of many different pathways to solve the problem, then you're actually getting much more creative. in finding solutions, and you might actually discover that you're finding better ways of doing things. Also, what you very often not consider is incubation. It's really to have an idea or to allow an idea to sit on the back burner while you're consciously working on something unrelated. I don't know whether you, who of you likes puzzling? You know, there's puzzle pieces and putting puzzles together? Yeah? Yeah. What happens when, you know, you come to a point where you can't see any puzzle piece fitting anymore? Right? And then what you typically do is, that's it, and you walk away and you do something else. What happens when you come back? What? You can see it quickly and easily. You do boom, 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 right? Same. You see it from a different perspective. Yeah. There was something else over there. Somebody had their hand up there. No? No? So that's what's happening typically. You know, suddenly you can see all those connections where, you know, the puzzle pieces are fitting. And that happens because your mind in the background, whilst you've been doing something else, processed the information and made those connections for you. It's a really amazing experience when that happens. Now consider that actually happens in our life. And so actually when your people say, you know, sleep on it, that's actually a good thing because you're giving your mind space to make those connections, or as you said, you know, to do something else. Very often I tell, you know, when students are analyzing data, for example, I very often tell them, you know, go hiking or whatever and do some gardening, because what that means is, you know, the information is composting. And then you can, you know, when you're composting at the beginning, you know, the waters are very muddy, but if you let it sit, it becomes much more clear. So it's really important to actually step back and to allow ideas to arise. And then there's a very often, you know, and that's like, you know, with the puzzle piece, we have an illumination stage, which the eureka or the aha moment, you know, where suddenly, you know, you think, gosh, why didn't I see that before? So it's known as, you know, it's very often coming as a surprise, but actually your brain mulled it over basically. Because very often suddenly, and it also means that, you know, as we said before, it's unhelpful to worry about a problem. So it's really to give it the space for the solution to occur. And actually procrastination, you always, you know, condemn it, but it's actually not such a bad idea because, you know, you allow things to be mulled over by your mind, as long as it's done constructively, right? So it's not, you know, yeah, you need to use the time constructively, and then you need to evaluate, right? And then the last bit is analytical decision making. Also, so if you use this process, it really, you know, gives you new creative ideas of how to solve your problem. It really helps you to see the problem from a totally different perspective. Now, decision making is the process of weighing the pros and cons of alternatives to make a choice. Yeah. Don't like the word actually decide, because literally it means to cut off or to kill off, which is, yeah, exactly, it's not very enlightening. So I prefer using choice over decision, to making a choice, because it means that you are not killing something else off, you're just basically saying, at the moment I'm choosing, rather than killing something off. That's with solving difficulties by making up one's mind in which direction to go, or what actions to take. And you know, we make decisions every day. So I think if you can make them more effectively, something else would be available in our life. Also consider that very often we make actually our decisions unconsciously, not only subconsciously, but unconsciously made on our mental models. And it's very fast, you know, we make them very fast. So one of the accesses to improve your decision making again is actually to become aware of what mental models are influencing your decision making. So there typically is 5 decision making steps involved. So first of all, we define the problem, and the question is then also, what do I have to actually decide? And then we're defining alternatives. What other options are available to the one I have? Then we're deciding on criteria, what factors do I need to consider in making the decision. And that's actually really something which we are often not allowing ourselves to take the time to make, to really look, what's the factors or criteria we need to consider here. And then we're weighing up the pros and the cons for each option based on that criteria. And then we're choosing and implementing the option. So it sounds very much, pretty much straightforward process, but again, like problem solving, it can be very fraught. Just going through. Also, the question is then, how rational are we? Are we? How much is always? The question is, is it more that we are making decisions logically, or are we more making them with our hearts? Which is the distinction also between explicit and implicit thinking or cognition. So very much is consciously is the manipulation of those representations we have in our minds. From the behaviorist perspective, weigh up the pros and the cons of the consequences that define our decisions. But then there's also the unconscious manipulation of representations. And that's very much the psychodynamic perspective saying, hold on, there's actually all this unconscious stuff going on here, which is influencing how we make our decisions, and very often we are not aware of it. So very often when we make our decisions rapidly, automatically, and without awareness of the process. So it's the bit of the intelligence and emotional intelligence. Again, we're using heuristics here to make our decisions faster and more effective, but sometimes they're irrational. Again, as we said before, so the same heuristic, the availability heuristic is playing a role in when we make decisions. So the idea that the faster the information comes to us, the more valid the information is. But as we said before, that's not necessarily so. Then there's also a representativeness heuristic, which where we are matching, but ignoring the likelihood. We're matching the information, but we're ignoring the likelihood of it actually occurring. I think I could just go through that. Oh, let's go. Finish me right. Just being conscious of the time. So I think it's really important, because when we're making decisions, we're always thinking we're making the best decisions, but actually it's very often we are highly susceptible to error. And many judgments we are making are unconscious. And the most learning occurs then also unconsciously. So for us, it's really actually important to see that we are less rational than it is assumed, and that emotions and motivation influence decision making a lot. And more of that you're going to learn in week 7. So emotions can produce illogical processes, but they can also be a better guide to thinking. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag there. When you have the gut feeling, it can actually be a much, much better decision than your logical decision. However, if you are reacting to something based on your emotions, then it's typically not as good as if you're actually really consciously weighing up what's going on or become conscious of what's going on. So you have to really distinguish between your your deeper guidance system, shall we say, and then you're reacting to something and make decisions fast and irrational. So that's the intuitive decision making. So it's using your gut for that. And it is the gut decisions, they are often so powerful because it actually connects more information than your mind would connect on its own. Yeah, does that make sense? So with your mind, you have only access to the information you are aware of, whereas your gut can consider basically the whole thing consciously and all the different elements of it. So there's a lot of different barriers to decision making as well. And one of the most important one is the confirmation bias. So interestingly, we are tending to seek out information that confirms our beliefs or ideas. And then we are basically saying, try to get the information, but it's actually we have been very selective in what information we are including, and we are ignoring those information which challenge our perspective. So really important to be aware that we are very biased information seekers, which is usually, especially an issue for experts, because we have invested so much in developing the theory of something that we tend to ignore much more information which challenges our theory of mind. And that's, where things specifically also in conversations become challenging, because we want to be really right about being right, yeah? And information that challenges that we put aside. So really important to be conscious of that. But also then framing of options is another aspect which influences our decision making, also which is a barrier to our decision making. So choices typically are substantially altered based on the presentation or framing of the options. And that's where marketing specialists are very good. So they are very clued into frame options they are giving people into those options, which or in wording questions or ordering particular words in questions or advertisements in a way which make us more susceptible to actually making that choice. Yep. I think I'm going through that. So it's connectivism, so I've asked you to go through that on your own. So connectivism basically means that all what I have been telling you is all true, and it happens much more interconnected than we thought. And because of new technology, we can now see that there is a lot more, that all the information processing is actually much more parallel happening rather than in stages. Just go through that on your own. Just going to the end here. So really the take-home messages from today is that thinking and learning are very much interconnected. That the language influences your thinking, but that also the thinking influences your language. Hence, if you change the way you are speaking about something, you have access to tremendously alter the world, because it changes your thinking, and the thinking then changes the actions you are taking. So that's really the main message here. But also thought and emotions are very much connected, and really important to become aware of both of them. And together, the thoughts and emotions influence your behavior. So next week then we're going into the next topic, which is learning and memory, and then this next week and the week after, Associate Professor Simon Moss is going to take the lectures, and I'm going to come in the beginning just to basically update you with important stuff about the unit, and then Simon is going to take over. Okay. So thanks so much for participating today, and I see you next week. Thank you.